All right, welcome to Hoops Tonight here at The Volume. Happy Tuesday, everybody. Hope all of you guys are having a great week. We got a quick show for you today. We're going to hit two games from last night. Doc Rivers made his coaching debut with the Milwaukee Bucks in Denver in what was a very competitive and interesting game. There was a fun little chess match at the end of that one, too, that I want to get into. So we're going to be breaking that game down from the perspective of both teams. And then one of the best young rivalries in the NBA right now, the Thunder and the Timberwolves, led by two guards that bring very different games to the table, but that are both kind of similarly regarded around the NBA. They put forth a fun show last night, so we're going to break that game down. Then I have about a half dozen mailbag questions for us to get to at the tail end of the show that'll have us bouncing around the league. You guys know the drill. Before we get started, subscribe to our brand new YouTube channel. It would mean a lot to me if you guys would take a second to scroll down and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget about our podcast feed, wherever you get your podcasts, under Hoops Tonight. I also found out the other day that it's really helpful for us when you rate and review the podcast. So those of you guys who use the podcast feed, if you would take a second to do that, I'd really appreciate that as well. Don't forget about my Twitter feed at _ Jason LT. That's where I put film threads in the mornings as well as show announcements. And then last but not least, keep dropping mailbag questions in the YouTube comments so we can keep hitting them throughout the season. All right, let's talk some basketball. So Doc's coaching debut with the Bucks last night. Right off the bat, you could tell the difference in kind of defensive intensity. There was an early possession where Dame was chasing Kentavious Caldwell-Pope off of a dribble handoff with Nikola Jokic and actually sidled up over the top of the screen and beat KCP to the spot, chested him up, and shut the possession down, which ended up leading to a late clock three from Nikola Jokic, where he missed a three along the kind of above the break on the right side. And I remember as I was watching that, I've been watching a ton of Milwaukee Bucks defensive tape all season, and there just aren't that many possessions this year where Dame actually beats a guy over the top of the screen and does his job. And the thing with Dame is obviously there's an energy conservation element to him being such a valuable offensive player, but Dame, even though he's a bit undersized, is an outstanding athlete. Even at this phase of his career where he's declined a little bit, he's an outstanding athlete. And so he's capable of doing a much better job than he had done. And one of the things I was looking forward to with Doc Rivers was just a better defensive commitment. And I thought he did do a better job. But I want to kind of start. We'll come back to the Doc Rivers stuff in a little bit. I wanted to start with the Nuggets on the defensive end of the floor. Obviously, they won the game. And some of the matchup stuff that they did a good job of kind of slowing down Milwaukee's offensive attack, because Milwaukee's an excellent offensive team as well. So the matchups kind of went as you would expect. They went with Kentavious Caldwell-Pope on Damian Lillard, and he did a good job there. Aaron Gordon on Giannis. And this kind of dynamic is really interesting, the Aaron Gordon and Nikola Jokic front court, specifically for Giannis and Brook Lopez, because the Bucks run a lot of inverted pick and roll where Giannis is actually the ball handler, and they'll have Brook set the ball screen. And it works really well in a lot of cases because most teams don't have versatile enough defensive front courts to be able to switch that action. And so a lot of times, you'll end up with some big guy who, and most big guys struggle with screen navigation because they're easy targets for screens. And mostly it's guards and wings that grow up in the game learning how to navigate screens, right? And one of the things that Milwaukee will weaponize a lot of times is a big defender on Giannis and then have Brooks guy set a screen. They don't want to switch that, and so they'll set a good screen and that big guy just isn't good at navigating it. Now Giannis is just barreling downhill and they can have a lot of success there. Well, the Nuggets, because Nikola Jokic has some experience guarding Giannis, mainly just giving him a ton of space for jump shots and having the ability to withstand Giannis's kind of bully ball attack to the chest, right? And we've seen that not just in the NBA, but in FIBA as well. And so they were able to basically switch any of the Giannis Brook Lopez pick and rolls. The main kind of dynamic that we saw where Milwaukee had some success on offense was the Dame Brook Lopez pick and roll, particularly in the first half, because Dame is one of those guys that kind of brings the unique combination of speed and pull-up shooting to bring Jokic out in his high drop coverage and to be able to have some success there. And in the first half in particular, Dame was sneaking pocket passes through and splitting and going around Jokic and actually generating some high-quality stuff. But we know Nikola Jokic is actually capable of being a pretty damn good pick and roll defender because he uses his brain, he uses his hands to disrupt plays by kind of just seeing things before they happen. And in that second half, Nikola Jokic was way more active in his high drop coverage, forced Dame into 3 turnovers in the third quarter. Overall, I thought Denver did a really nice job defensively. That was kind of the story of the game. I mean, Doc Rivers talked about after the game how it was kind of an offensive loss, and we're going to get into some of those details here in a little bit, but I want to give Denver credit. I thought they played a really good defensive game. And then on the other end of the floor, it was kind of similar to the Celtics game in the sense that it kind of devolved into a heavy dose of Nikola Jokic and Jamal Murray two-man game. And this is where I want to talk about the chess match a little bit down the stretch, because Doc actually had a really sound defensive game plan down the stretch of that game. He put Giannis Antetokounmpo on Nikola Jokic. That allowed him to switch the Murray-Jokic pick and roll. And so what he did is he put Brook Lopez on whoever the big forward was, whether it was Peyton Watson or Aaron Gordon. And so one of the things Denver was doing is they were running down the floor and they were running quick early ball screens with Kentavious Caldwell-Pope to get Damian Lillard switched onto Jamal Murray. Then once Dame was on Jamal Murray, they'd run him off the Jokic ball screen. And that's where Milwaukee was countering by switching Giannis quickly onto Jamal Murray. Now, one of the things that Denver will do to quickly attack that is to have Jamal quickly pull the ball out, make a post entry to Jokic now that he has Damian Lillard on him. But the Bucks were doing what's called a scram switch, for basically right when the post entry is getting made, Dame is turning and leaving. And because Brook is in a perfect position to kind of do that kind of switch, think of it this way. Like, imagine Aaron Gordon or Peyton Watson in the dunker spot. Imagine, and remember, the dunker spot is that spot that's like just outside the block, just kind of behind the backboard, right? And the idea behind that spot is that's where if anybody steps up to help, someone can throw you a drop-off pass and you can basically take a drop step into the basket and dunk it if you're a really good athlete, right? That's why it's called the dunker spot. So because Brook Lopez is guarding a player in the dunker spot, Brook is basically under the basket. So when Jokic gets a switch and he wants to walk the guard down to try to get to a good position for him to attack in that mismatch, he's going somewhere within like 10 feet of the rim, right? And so where he's ceiling 10 feet from the rim, it's really easy for Brook Lopez to just take 2 steps up, and now he's guarding Jokic. And basically there's a brief kind of interchange there where Dame, as soon as he switches onto Jokic, will then sprint over to Aaron Gordon or Peyton Watson as Brook Lopez is going up to Nikola Jokic. And so that was kind of the chess match, right? Like the Nuggets running early screens to get Damian Lillard onto Jamal Murray. Then they were running the two-man game. On the backside, the Bucks were scramming to prevent that switch to leading to a Jokic mismatch in the post. But this is where it gets kind of unfair, because Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic can score regardless of what you do. There was a play where they executed it perfectly. They scram switch. Giannis kind of pressures Jamal Murray. Brook Lopez gets back to Nikola Jokic. But in all of that action, there's kind of quite a bit of space that forms right in the middle of the floor. And Nikola Jokic just goes to a hard dribble to his left, drop step, spin back over his left shoulder, makes a right-handed hook. And it like looked easy. And you're just like, oh, yeah, we did everything right. But Nikola Jokic just makes 70% of his hook shots. So, yeah, that sucks, right? And then on the very next possession, Nikola Jokic, because he identifies the coverage. And Nikola Jokic, again, one of the smartest players in the league, he goes, oh, look, there's scram switching out of this post up. So there's going to be an interchange there where Damian Lillard has his back turned and he's running to the cutter, and he's small, so I'm just going to turn and throw it up to the rim. And if you watch on the very next possession, by the way, I clipped all of these plays. So you can actually go to my Twitter feed at _JasonLT and see not just the video, but I give you like a word-by-word breakdown of what happens on these possessions as well. But very next possession, Jokic catches and turns and spots Peyton Watson cutting out of the dunker spot. And to Dame's credit, he made a really impressive defensive play where he just jumped up and met Peyton Watson up at the rim and just gave enough of a disruption to the lob. I still thought it was a pretty good pass, and you run that same play 5 times, like Peyton Watson probably dunks it 4 times, but to Dame's credit, he made that extra effort, and he kind of broke the play up. And so where it got kind of funny, because that was like where the dynamic of the game was going, was that scram switch, and then basically Jokic working out of the post against Brook Lopez with Dame guarding a big athlete along the baseline, right? Well, in between this stretch, the Bucks hit a couple of threes. Brook Lopez hits like a 3 at the right wing. It was kind of funny. Giannis was a little frustrated after he throws the swing pass. He's kind of like, what are you doing? And then it goes in and he's like, all right, great. And then Giannis hits a pull-up 3 on the left side of the floor. All of a sudden, it's a 3-point game. So I think it was like 108 to 105 at this point in the game. And so now I'm sitting there thinking, I'm like, okay, Denver's only up a 3. It's a 1-possession game. Milwaukee just ran this coverage twice, and they got a stop on the previous possession, and they forced Jokic into a hook shot, albeit one that he can make at a high clip, but they forced Jokic into an ISO against Brook Lopez. Like, okay, defense is kind of working pretty well. Well, Doc Rivers makes a bizarre adjustment. He switches Brook Lopez onto Nikola Jokic and puts Giannis onto Aaron Gordon, and they run the exact same sequence. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope sets the screen, gets Dame switched on to Jamal Murray. Jamal Murray comes off the ball screen, the Bucks switch. Now Brook Lopez is guarding Jamal Murray, and Dame's on Nikola Jokic. Giannis scrams him out of the switch, runs over to guard Jokic. Dame goes back to Aaron Gordon. But here's the problem. Now it's Brook Lopez on Jamal Murray, not Giannis Antetokounmpo. And so Jamal Murray just goes, his eyes just light up, and he just hits him with a dribble combination into like a step back jump shot in the mid-range where Jamal gets plenty of separation and gets a really clean look at the basket and knocks it down. And what was so frustrating about it is the Bucks go down and Giannis misses an easy hook shot, which it is what it is. They go down to the other end, and they run it the right way this time with Brook back on Aaron Gordon and with Giannis back on Jokic. They run the same sequence. Giannis gets switched on to Jamal Murray. Jamal Murray tries another pull-up jump shot on Giannis, but he's way up closer, much better contest, forces a miss, but it doesn't matter at that point because it's basically too late and the game is over. So that was like the weird thing in the Doc Rivers bit, which we'll get to in a little bit, which was like they had this really good defensive game plan where they got 2 stops out of 3 possessions, and on the third one forced Jokic into a pretty difficult hook shot, and then he bailed on it the one time they had a one-possession game where they had an opportunity to get a stop and then go down and potentially get a tie. And so that was kind of weird. But I want to be clear. This is such a great example of how hard Denver is to guard, because even in the event that I described, which is Doc Rivers sticks with his defensive strategy that I mentioned with Giannis on Aaron Gordon with Giannis on Jokic and with Brook on Aaron Gordon and all that stuff, you still are conceding a lob pass to Peyton Watson. That's a pretty high percentage play. And a hook shot for Nikola Jokic, that's a pretty high percentage play. It was really just the Giannis ISO on Jamal Murray where Jamal Murray ISO'd Giannis and missed the 3 where they got kind of like a clean stop where like you almost expected the shot to miss. And that, for the record, is exactly what makes Denver my championship favorite. Just when they get into these slow down environments, and I've been beating this drum all season long, but they get better shots down the stretch of games. And it just puts you in a bind as the opponent. But again, I didn't agree with the strategy on that one singular possession from Doc Rivers. I thought it took away one of their chances to win. But it was a super interesting game. Both teams present unique personnel advantages and disadvantages for each other. But once again, down the stretch, it just came down to execution. Also, one of the things that stood out to me, Jamal Murray just has a clear ability to elevate his game for the best opponents in the league. He's only averaging 21 points a game this year. He's only had 35-plus points 3 times all season, but 2 of those were against Boston and Milwaukee. And I think that's a pretty clear indicator. I mean, this is something we've known about Jamal for a while, but and he's having a very good regular season for the record. But that said, it's just very clear that when we get into these environments against the best teams in the league, where the other role players for Denver kind of like start to decline a little bit just in the overall intensity, Jamal Murray's one of those rare guys, and there's maybe like 15 to 20 of them in the league, where when you get into those like super intense, super physical, super, competitive environments, he can take his game up a level. And that's, when we talk about duos, a lot of times Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic get kind of looked over because of the regular season stats from Jamal Murray. But like when push comes to shove in a really intense basketball game, there's just not a better duo in the league right now than Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic, because Jamal Murray does play like a superstar shot maker in those environments, and Nikola Jokic is the best player in the world. And I thought last night was a great example of that against the one duo in the NBA that has a decent chance to be better than Nikola Jokic and Jamal Murray, and I thought they demonstrated that was not the case last night. On the Doc Rivers front, I thought it was one of Dame's best defensive games of the season. Like I mentioned earlier, that early stop on KCP on that dribble handoff where he gets up over the screen and takes that contact in the chest and shuts the play down. Like Dame has a lot of that potential. And it matters on 2 different levels. One, obviously, it's important for Dame to commit a certain amount just for Milwaukee to get to like kind of that mandatory minimum level of respectable defense to be able to contend. But the second big part of it is just this is a different team than the Blazers were. Like, I've talked about this a lot on the show, but a lot of Dame's play type usage is down in terms of frequency from years past. Like, he's running a few fewer pick and rolls than he did last year, a few fewer ISOs than he did last year. Just everything's down a little bit in terms of frequency. And a big reason for that is like He's not going your turn, my turn with CJ McCollum. He's not going your turn, my turn with Anthony Simons. He's not going your turn, my turn with LaMarcus Aldridge. He's got Giannis. He's got Chris Middleton who likes to go. Even Brook Lopez is a guy that will look to be aggressive with the basketball in his hands. It's much more of an equal opportunity offense than what he had in Portland. And so that means two things. One, it's going to disrupt his rhythm a little bit. It's going to make it harder for him to kind of constantly stay in a rhythm and flow. But two, one of the ways to deal with that is take that extra energy that you have and devote it towards the defensive end of the floor and just do a better job there than he had done. I've talked a lot about with Doc Rivers in particular, how he can help in some very key areas for Milwaukee in terms of their details, right? Milwaukee has some personnel limitations. They do, especially in the backcourt and especially in terms of overall team speed and playable athleticism, right? What that means is they can't afford to hemorrhage points on the margins. They will have times where they do everything right and a guy makes a shot. Whether that's Jokic hitting a hook shot over Brook Lopez or it's some guard hitting a tough shot over Malik Beasley, even though he's doing his best to try to get in the way, right? There are personnel limitations that will be there. What you can't afford is to also lose points in execution, not sprinting back in transition defense, not communicating your matchups, bad floor balance on offense leading to those transition opportunities, right? Just straight up punting defensive possessions with guys not doing their jobs. That's where they can run into some real problems because again, they don't need to be, I think Dame and Giannis, if they optimize on the offensive end of the floor, they have the potential to be one of the very best offenses in the league, right? In a playoff setting, but they aren't going to be good enough to win if they're one of the worst defenses in the league. They have to get that defense up to the point where it's kind of like what Denver was last year, where depending on the matchup, they could just find a way to disrupt things enough to buy them margin for error for their offense to carry them through the day. And again, I thought Dame's defensive effort last night was a great example of how Doc, just by his aura and his ability to sit in a room and just kind of command the respect and the ear of the people in his locker room, can go a long way to getting those guys to doing their job on defense, doing their job in transition, just more commitment to the details. And I thought between that stop on KCP and then the breakup of the lob and that clutch sequence was just an example of just a little bit better commitment to those details from Damian Lillard. I thought the game plan was sound too. Doc Rivers talked after the game about how he thought his half-court defense was good and that it really came down to the offensive end. I agree with him. I thought, with exception to that one singular bizarre late-game adjustment where he let Brook Lopez get onto Jamal Murray, which, by the way, he quickly audibled out of, so it was only a 2-point mistake in the game. It wasn't like he stuck with that for a while. He had Giannis on Jokic. He made one singular error there, and then he immediately got out of it and got a stop. And again, I agree with him. I think the offense is where the biggest area of opportunity for this team is. And it's weird because it feels so weird to talk about the Bucks offense because you look at their metrics and they're great. It's kind of like with the Lakers. With the Lakers, everyone's talking about their rebounding issues, and they're actually one of the best defensive rebounding teams in the league. But it's specific lineups. It's if you run this group at an end of the game, will you be able to get enough rebounds? And that's the thing. It's with the Bucks, it's not so much about how many points they score per 100 possessions in an 82-game season. It's can they execute like Denver does at the end of a close game? Can they get the Dame Giannis pick and roll to the point where it always generates a really high-quality shot, the way that Denver can? Because if they can do that, that is what buys them the margin for error to be a mediocre defense. And, when you look at the trade deadline, and who knows, maybe they'll be able to pull something off. But with their asset situation, I don't necessarily think they're going to have a super easy time tracking down some significant upgrade at the 2-guard spot, right? So, with that being the reality, it's actually more important for them to kind of lean into what they've got here and get the most offensively out of this group and then try to build a coherent enough defense to make that kind of overall partnership work the way that Denver did. One last thing I wanted to talk about on the Milwaukee front is Bobby Portis. So Bobby Portis was I want to say minus 18 or so, minus 14, I think, in that game. And really, really struggled. And there were some specific stretches where, for whatever reason, Doc Rivers had him out there with Nikola Jokic, which is a recipe for disaster. And some of that is like, I think Jokic played like 40 minutes and you're not going to play Brook 40 minutes. So like there was just some natural overlap that took place there. But I saw a lot of Bucks fans last night talking about how Bobby Portis is the major issue and they got to find some sort of backup big man and blah, 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 blah. And I don't necessarily disagree from the standpoint of it'd be great to have a better backup big. You know, like there's a lot of teams in the league that are in that situation. The Warriors would love to have a better backup big. Lakers would love to have a better backup big, right? Like it's a consistent issue around the league. My thing is I wanted to use this opportunity to talk about, you know, the difference in return on your investment when it comes to a bench player versus a player that can play in your core five. So one of the reasons I've been talking about this with the Lakers specifically is when you rank the Lakers top 5 players, it's like Austin Reeves, LeBron James, Anthony Davis, and it's probably like a Rui Hachimura and like a D'Angelo Russell or Jared Vanderbilt, right? And one of the problems is like more often than not, they end up having to leave a couple of those guys on the bench, and they have lesser players playing in the starting lineup. And so I'm a big believer in the number one priority for a basketball team is to figure out who your main 5 is. That's what matters the most. And then from there, if you can make inexpensive upgrades, then great. My thing is like if I'm the Bucks and I have the opportunity to make a significant trade where I use whatever assets I have remaining, I'd rather use it to upgrade my core 5 into a group that makes more sense because you're going to scale minutes up when you get to that point. Like, yeah, Bobby Portis looked really rough, especially in specific stretches against Denver where he was on the floor with Jokic. But he's never, ever, 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 ever going to be on the floor with Jokic in a playoff series. Like, chances are, at least not as the sole center, chances are you're scaling minutes up to match Denver starters' minutes when you get into that environment. Your core 5 matters the most. If you can make ancillary upgrades for very little in terms of investment of assets, I'm on board. But then there's the flip side there. Guess what? Bobby Portis is better than the vast majority of veteran minimum type centers around the league. Bobby Portis is much better than the types of centers you're going to get for a very small amount of asset spending in terms of the trade market, right? That's the issue. If you want to get a really good center that as a backup, it's just going to be difficult to pull off. And so I'm all for an upgrade at that position if it comes available for relatively inexpensive. But in the event of an asset being put on the table for Milwaukee, I would try to put that asset on the table for a more specific need, which is a two-way perimeter defender, a guy that can guard the other team's best guard and be a reliable floor spacing option for the Bucks. That's where I'd be putting my primary kind of efforts in the trade market. And then, yeah, if I can flip a second-round pick and some salary filler for an upgrade at backup center, then great. But I wouldn't do it in any sort of significant expenditure. Looking for a super offer for Super Bowl 58? Well, DraftKings has you covered. New customers can bet on the big game and turn $5 into $200 instantly in bonus bets. The line right now is at San Francisco minus 1.5, but you can bet all sorts of things on the game, even the coin toss, although big shock, it's going to be 50-50 odds there. My brothers and I always place a bunch of bets on the Super Bowl every year. I'm not actually sure what I'm going to do yet, but I'm excited. It should be a great game. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use code HOOPS, that's HOOPS. New customers can bet $5 to get $200 instantly in bonus bets, only on DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of Super Bowl 58 with code HOOPS. Again, that's HOOPS. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER, or in West Virginia, visit www.1800gambler.net. In New York, call 8778-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY to 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. Please play responsibly on behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort in Kansas. 21 plus, age varies by jurisdiction, void in Ontario. Bonus bets expire 168 hours after issuance. See dkng.com/football for eligibility and deposit restrictions, terms, and responsible gambling resources. All right, moving on to Timberwolves Thunder. So the key matchup in this particular game that kind of changed the way that Oklahoma City had to play offense is the Timberwolves put Jaden McDaniels on Chet Holmgren. one of the biggest things that Oklahoma City does on offense is they run ball screens with Chet, and they have him pop to the top of the key. I've talked about this concept a lot on the show, but pick and pops are one of the hardest actions to guard in the NBA with modern pick and roll coverages. Think of it like this. If your guard can shoot a pull-up jump shot, then my guard has to chase over the top. If my guard has to chase over the top, then I need a screen defender to funnel him into. Because if there's no screen defender and I chase over the top, you can imagine what would happen. If I'm guarding Shai and I'm chasing over the top of the screen, Shai's just going to go over the screen and go right at the basket. And if there's no help defender there, I'm not going to be able to get there in time to meet him at the rim. So that's why that screen defender is essentially there waiting for you as the on-ball guy to funnel Shai into him. Well, that works pretty well in screen and roll because you can play what's called no roller behind coverage, where like the roller's coming this way, the ball handler's coming this way, and I'm kind of splitting the difference between the two and trying to make them make a decision. And if I'm a big athletic center, can kind of cover enough ground to be a reasonable defensive option there. But if I pop to the three-point line, I can't contain the ball handler as the big man and also guard the guy at the top of the key. It's one of the easiest ways to get a defense in rotation. And that, by the way, is why these really skilled bigs, guys like Chet, guys like Sabonis, guys like Anthony Davis, guys like Nikola Jokic, guys like Joel Embiid, can cause so many problems for teams in pick and pop. It just immediately gets the defense into rotation. It's one of the reasons why, by the way, I've been talking so much about Nikola Jokic's jump shot this season, because last year he was just deadly on it. And so a lot of Denver's offense was pick and pop, Jokic pump fake as the guy's sprinting at him. Now he's coming downhill making decisions as he's barreling towards the rim, right? So like having a big man that could set a ball screen and force a traditional pick and roll coverage and pop to the top of the key and make plays there is huge. That is what Chet does for Oklahoma City. But when you put Jaden McDaniels, who, because Chet is kind of thin, is strong enough to avoid getting bullied by Chet, now they can switch any Chet ball screen with any of the ball handlers on the floor. And it completely changed the way that Oklahoma City had to play offense, because now they're taking Chet off the ball and basically having him spot up. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander ran 12 ISOs in this game. He typically only runs about 7 or 8 a game. As a team, Oklahoma City averages 27 assists per game this season. They only had 21 against the Timberwolves. It became much more stagnant. It became a lot more Jalen Williams and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander playing one-on-one. It just was a more challenging offensive game for Oklahoma City. Great example of some of the personnel kind of flexibility that you get by having a guy like Jaden McDaniels. And then on the flip side, having a guy like Chet, that as great as he's going to be at this phase of his career, is a little too skinny and can struggle in some specific matchups. And this was an example of one of those matchups for Chet. And like Chet in general just had a really bad game. And I thought the way that kind of dynamic kind of threw him out of whack went a long way. But to Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Jalen Williams' credit, they still had a lot of success creating their own shot in this game. But Minnesota's defense just kind of dictated the flow of Oklahoma City's offense. They held them to just 101 points. By the way, Oklahoma City is the 6th best offense in the league by offensive rating, and they got shut down. Minnesota has, according to Cleaning the Glass, a 112.5 defensive rating against the top 10 offenses in the league. Only Cleveland has been better. And so Minnesota consistently has been able to get their defense to translate against the top tier offenses in the league. As I've said many times throughout the season, Minnesota's defense is for real. It was a really good Anthony Edwards and Karl Towns decision-making game. Talked a lot about this over the course of the season. My main concern with Minnesota is they're an average clutch offense and they're an average half-court offense. And when you get into those really slow-down environments, that can be an issue. And specifically, it gets worse in the playoffs when you've got Anthony Edwards, who's very, very young, very, very young. And I think he's going to be a very, very good player for a very, very long time. I think he's a bona fide superstar in the making, all that stuff. He's 21. So, he's young. And then Karl Towns, who's historically been a pretty poor decision maker in those environments. Well, this game was not one of those games. I thought Karl Towns and Ant were excellent on offense down the stretch of this game. They were making really good kick out passes to shooters. They weren't forcing things, which is a thing that the two of them have done from time to time in their careers. The Wolves had 8 assists in 11 made field goals in that fourth quarter. They shot 58% of the field from the field. 6 of those 8 assists were from Karl Towns and from Anthony Edwards. But at the same time, they brought the aggression when it made sense. Karl Towns hit a 3 off of like a flare screen at the top of the key. Anthony Edwards hit a pull-up 3 in pick and roll when the defender was too far back. Then there was this, I posted the clip of this one where Ant like rejected a ball screen like 30 feet from the basket and just rose up and just dunked it with 2 hands and probably got fouled on the play as well. I thought they were magnificent down the stretch of this particular game. Anthony Edwards was complaining after the game about officiating. I think the plays he's referencing, the dunk I mentioned, he got hit by SGA. That probably should have sent him to the line. Then there was a Jaden McDaniels foul on Shai kind of at the right block where Shai kind of got into his body and was using his off arm, like literally like fighting Jaden off with his off arm, and Jaden was kind of grabbing at his off arm, so it was like hand fighting that should have been able to go both ways, but Jaden got called for the foul, and so I think Ant was just kind of getting at some of the inconsistencies, and again, I'm never going to go in on one particular team and how they're affected, but league-wide, it is an issue. League-wide, I think officiating is a massive issue around the league. So anytime a player brings it up, I'm obviously going to support them within the context of the league-wide issue. But decision-making, like I said, that specific dynamic of Ant and Karl Towns like making the right driving kick reads and not forcing tough shots and making sure guys stay in rhythm goes a long way towards this team's championship potential. They had a 157 offensive rating in the clutch situation against Oklahoma City last night. That's been an issue for them all season. They've been a mediocre. I think I mentioned in yesterday's show, they've been below 109 offensive rating in clutch situations all season before last night. Really bad in the last like month or so. They were in that like a high 90s for offensive rating. That's not very good. I've said before, but clutch offense and half-court offense are the 2 closest replicas we have in the NBA regular season of playoff offense. And that's why I keep such a close eye on those 2 categories. And they've been mediocre in both categories all season long. But I thought last night was a big step in the right direction on that front for Minnesota. A couple other shout-outs. Jaden McDaniels hit a huge corner 3 in the right, tight space too, quick release. Ant put a pass right in the shooting pocket and he knocked it down. He also had a huge tip-in late in the game when the Thunder needed to stop, and Anthony Edwards was tired, so he was like hiding in the right corner. They ran a ball screen for Nickeil Alexander-Walker on the left side, and he ended up forcing up a tough floater, and he missed it. But Shai Gilgeous-Alexander was guarding Jaden McDaniels on the right wing, and Jaden noticed Shai had his head turned and wasn't paying attention. He just snuck right in front of him, got in there, and got a huge tap-in with his left hand that ended up being basically the dagger in this particular game. And then also I wanted to shout out Jordan McLaughlin. He's shooting the ball much better this year than he did last year. He had 2 massive threes in the second half, one off the catch and then one kind of off a ball screen where the defender ducked underneath the pick. And then as a result of that, he had a pump fake driving, really tough scoop shot over Chet Holmgren that kind of came from him making those first 2 threes and getting the defender to kind of chase him off the line. I thought that was a really important sequence in this particular game as Oklahoma City was making their run in that second half. On the Thunder front, the core players are still slumping really hard. Josh Giddey started hot, made a few threes in a row, but then he finished cold. Lou Dort missed a bunch of shots in the second half, some good looks too. Chet had a really rough game. We talked about this in the power rankings yesterday, but this has been a theme for a little while now for OKC. Giddey, Dort, and Holmgren are all struggling right now. And as a result, Oklahoma City's offense is kind of tanking. And, some of this is like young players can just be inconsistent, but I wanted to go over some specific ways, not just for the Thunder, but also for young basketball players out there to help getting through a slump, because this is something that happens. You can have slumps. I personally, I was a very streaky shooter when I was playing in college. I had a conference play sequence one of the seasons I played where I shot like 50% from 3. And then I had another stretch in non-conference play like the very next year where I remember over the course of a week in like 4 games, I missed 22 consecutive threes. So like you can slump. It happens. It's part of the game, right? And I've learned as I've gotten older, there are some specific things that I think work really well as it pertains to trying to get out of a slump. First of all, lots more off-court work to try to polish things up. I know it sounds crazy, but you can derive confidence by knowing you've made that shot. When you're standing in the game and you go, I made 500 of these in the last 2 days, I have a much better chance of making it today. So off-court work is a big one. 2, better offensive process. And some of this is matchup related. We talked about the switching that the OKC could do by using Jaden McDaniels to switch any sort of ball screen, right? Involving Chet Holmgren, and that can stagnate teams and prevent drive and kick, but you can still generate drive and kick rotation situations by hunting drive and kick instead of hunting ISO. What I mean by that is, like, rather than getting into your dribble combinations and trying to hunt a pull-up jump shot, just think, I got to beat this dude off the dribble so that I can draw a help defender and get the ball moving around. As the ball's popping around, it just adds a rhythm and a flow to the offense that gives guys a better chance of making shots. And then lastly, gain confidence in other areas of the game. This was a big one for me in my mid-20s that I kind of figured out, which is, like, when you're not shooting well and you have another tool, which is you're an athlete, go play hard. Like, make plays on defense, make plays on the glass, make plays elsewhere, and you will gain confidence knowing that you're impacting winning outside of the shot, which will put you in a position when you're shooting, you don't have as much pressure on your mind to make the shot because you know even if you miss it, you're helping the team elsewhere. And so again, I just wanted to kind of throw that out there as just a couple of different examples, especially for young basketball players out there, for how to deal with when you're in a slump. Work harder off the court, work harder on the court, and then as a team, play better fluid and motion basketball to keep everybody involved. All right, before we get out of here, let's go to our mailbag. First question. Maybe a hot take, but the Celtics without Porzingis playing don't look like a contender. The drop-off from Kristaps Porzingis to Al Horford is huge at this point, and I feel like every time KP isn't playing, it's a really close win or they lose if the opponent is a decent team. Zubac was also out when they got blown out by the Clippers, so pretty strange. It's an interesting thing to bring up. I agree, for the record. Like, if Kristaps Porzingis goes down, it's a gigantic blow to any title chances for the Celtics. My thing is, like, anytime someone brings that up, I go, okay, but, like, is there a team out there that can withstand that sort of thing? Like, let's look at Denver. If they lose Jokic, season over, obviously. You lose Jamal Murray, season's over, obviously. It's just we saw that in the two previous playoff runs. Like, there's just not enough offensive firepower, and that happens. You know, Michael Porter Jr. is like a rebounder, a help defender, and a spot-up guy. Like, it's just a big drop-off going from him to, like, a Justin Holiday. Or even if you go to like a Peyton Watson, if you run Peyton Watson and Aaron Gordon and Nikola Jokic, I think some of the bigger, more athletic teams are going to really pack the paint and test Peyton and Aaron Gordon as shooters, right? Take Aaron Gordon out of the situation. It's a significant drop-off down to Peyton Watson, who's a good young player. Aaron Gordon's one of the best role players in the league. KCP is their best perimeter defender. He's like literally the guy they throw on the other team's best guard every single night. Like, he's vitally important to them. So point being, Denver can't afford to lose anybody either. Milwaukee, like, if they lose Chris Middleton, they're like Marjan Beauchamp is who you're going to. Jay Crowder, who is incredibly slow at this phase in his career. Obviously, Damian and Giannis are vitally important. We just talked earlier about how bad they are at backup center. So if Brook Lopez is out, that's obviously catastrophic. Malik Beasley's out. Okay, you put in Andre Jackson Jr. Now you're playing a kid in these environments. Like, they're just Pat Connaughton. I guess going from Malik Beasley to Pat Connaughton is like the one where you're like, it doesn't affect their chances that much. But again, if Milwaukee loses an important role player, they're in a tough spot. The Clippers, you lose James Harden, changes that team. Lose Paul George, changes that team. Lose Kawhi Leonard, changes that team. Lose Terrence Mann, changes that team. Lose Zubac, changes that team. The Lakers, they can't afford anybody either. Like, none of these teams can afford to lose a player. So, like, the margins are too tight. So I agree with you as it pertains to Porzingis. My thing is, like, I just don't think it's a problem that's unique to Boston. Next question. I saw someone suggest a Malcolm Brogdon and Jeremy Grant trade for the Lakers and was wondering what you thought about it. It's doing the two things you said you want for the Lakers at their 1-3. I would love Jeremy Grant. I think he's actually a much better defensive player than he's shown in Portland. I think we saw some of that when he was in Denver. I just don't think, from what I've heard, Jeremy Grant has much interest at all in playing a role for a contender. That doesn't mean a trade can't be made there. It just, I'm just not sure that he's the right guy to go after it because he doesn't necessarily want to do it. But as a player, I think he'd be perfect. He can shoot the ball really well. He can attack mismatches. He's got perimeter defense capability. I love Jeremy Grant. Think he could help a lot of teams, but I just don't necessarily see a team trading for him. I don't think Malcolm Brogdon necessarily helps the Laker backcourt because he's not athletic enough. He's a better athlete than Austin or D'Lo, but he's not a great athlete the way that like a DeJounte Murray or a Bruce Brown is. He's just another skill guard. And so I wouldn't really necessarily see Malcolm Brogdon as a guy that could help too much. And I think someone else will end up hopping in there to get him. Next question. When Jason says best, don't take him seriously. He said Anthony Davis was the best player in the world last playoffs a few days before the Denver series. Then said AD isn't good enough post-Denver series. Do change his mind, depends on what agenda he wants to say today. So this is a consistent thing that I get criticism for on this show that I wanted to bring up. There's a huge difference between the way I rank players in a vacuum versus the way I rank players in terms of like the amount of recognition they deserve. To me, the guy who gets the trophy gets all the bragging rights. And at that point, before the Denver series last year, I was speaking about the bragging rights. Anthony Davis was a player who had a better playoff resume to that point than Nikola Jokic. That's why I had him in that position. Myself, nor anybody, thought that Anthony Davis was a better player than Nikola Jokic in a vacuum. None of us thought that. That wasn't the situation. I thought it was the kind of like standing, like ego-related, resume-related, like reputation-related standing going into that series. AD's here, Jokic is here. Let's see what happens in the series. Oh, wait. Jokic is way up here. He's way better than Anthony Davis. I also ranked Luka Doncic 10th in my player rankings this summer. Do I actually think Luka is the 10th best player in the world? No. It has to do with the way I do rankings based on reputation and historical performance in the playoffs. That's just me as it pertains to respect and acknowledging what actually has been done. It's just kind of my overall philosophy regarding winning. I'm a big believer in like winning is why we do this. Let's acknowledge and respect and give props to the winners. In a vacuum is an entirely different conversation. To me, that it's like two completely separate conversations, for lack of a better word. And to Anthony Davis's credit, he did outplay Nikola Jokic in the conference finals back in 2020, which was kind of the grounds for why that was the case. But the other thing too, and this is the last thing I'll say about it, I am never married to an opinion. I'm always going to react to new information. So like the idea that I have an agenda doesn't actually make any sense, because I had an agenda that a center couldn't win a title as a slow-footed player last year because that was based on NBA history. But then new information came to the table and it's like, oh, actually this can work as long as XYZ happens and as long as the player can do ABC. And then all of a sudden I'm like, okay, this new information is going to change my outlook. Now I do believe you can win that way as long as these other things happen, right? So like, again, like I know it's really hard when you watch, like, because I know not everybody watches every single video. And so a lot of times like my overarching opinions can get kind of disseminated into these like, out of context things. And like those of you guys who actually do follow the show more closely, I think have a better idea of where I stand on this stuff. But I wanted to use the mailbag today to clarify that kind of thing. I usually will tell you beforehand the difference between like what kind of list I'm making versus a different list. For instance, I have a contenders list and I have power rankings. My contenders list is purely about what I expect in the postseason. My power rankings is a method with which I can give props to players within the regular season. That's how that works, right? My player rankings are almost always going to be big picture, resume, reputation based. I'm not much into hypothetical player rankings. Hypothetically, Nikola Jokic was the best player in the world because that's what he was at that moment in time last year. But I wanted to see him get the trophy first because to me, the trophy matters. And so hopefully that kind of clarifies that for you guys. Next question. Hey, Jason, was wondering after another blowout loss to a true contender how the Celtics can be taken seriously as championship contenders. Last year, they felt like they lost to bad teams and beat good ones, which is why they played around too much with the Hawks, Philly without Embiid, and Miami. This year is the opposite. They kill bad teams, but they've been blown out by the Clippers, the Bucks, the Thunder. And while they looked close after the losses, it still felt like blowouts to Minnesota, Philly, and Denver. Just curious how you can rationalize a team being the worst in the league against top opponents, winning in the finals, since I feel like they should be much closer to, or be closer to Dallas, Sacramento, or the Cavs tier of contenders where they could get lucky and win, but it'd be a long shot. Just don't feel like a very good team. And honestly, I think the Celtics fans should expect a full rebuild in the next year or two since Tatum is just flat out not that good. Love the show and thanks for all the great content. Wow, I have to say, that is one of the more negative views of the Celtics that I've seen this season. Like, I don't think they're going to be rebuilding next year. I do not think that they're in the Dallas, Sacramento, Cavs tier. Not saying you're wrong, I just disagree. I do think that there's concerns that come from their performance against good teams. I've mentioned this, like, they've played 10 games recently, the last 10 games. 7 of them have been against teams that are not in my top 5 contenders. 3 of them are against teams that are in my top 5 contenders. And they lost all 3 of the games against the top 5 contenders, and they won all 7 of the games against the other teams. Obviously, that's concerning. Specifically in those 3 losses, it was their offense that struggled. That's concerning. That ties back to a lot of the things we've talked about all season involving their offensive process. So, like, obviously it's concerning. My thing is, like, in the big picture, Boston has still been way more impressive in this regular season than most of the teams that we've seen. They still have, in my opinion, the most talented roster in the NBA. Tatum is still a young wing in his mid-20s who is yet to really truly hit his ceiling, or even close for that matter. I just think it's foolish to count them out. And even though they have big question marks, I still very much view them as a top-tier championship contender. Next question. Did the Rockets beat the Lakers' ass? Yes or no? Yes, they did. I will say, like, I said this in January, early January. I said it became clear to me after the in-season tournament that the Lakers just completely let go of the rope in terms of effort and focus and energy. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. I think some of it is natural human nature, like you feel accomplished and no one else does, so they're all coming at you, and that's part of it. I think the core players are really frustrated with their coach. There's a lot of bad body language stuff still coming out of that situation. I think there was a video going around of Anthony Davis walking away from a huddle as Darvin was drawing up a play in last night's game. Another big part of it too is like the starting lineup situation, and like there being overwhelming evidence that Darvin Ham is making a repeated poor decision by starting Taurean Prince next to D'Angelo Russell and Austin Reeves, and he just doesn't give a shit what any of us think or what any of the data says or what the scoreboard says, and he's just leaning into it. And I think that is causing some of the discouraging stuff. But regardless of what the actual cause is, there's no doubt that the Lakers are a heavily up and down effort, energy, and focus team, which is why I said in early January, I said, expect the Lakers to look awesome and terrible several more times before the deadline. They have very much done that. Before this last game that they just got their ass beat in Houston, they were 5-2 in their previous 7 games, and their offense was turning around. Like, this is what they do. This is what this Laker team is. Now, a couple things. First of all, there's a clear delineation between how they play at home and on the road. The Lakers are 17-8 at home and 7-16 on the road. Goes to show you that they're not bringing that effort and energy in particular when they go away from home. I think a big part of that too is like the Laker faithful at Staples Center or Crypto.com Arena. They don't let that shit fly. They'll boo you. So like, I think there's just more pressure to play harder when you're at home. I think also LeBron in particular, when he's at home in front of Will Ferrell and all the celebrities and shit, like I think he just, brings a better intensity in those environments. But the second thing is, I want to be clear. The Lakers will not be on my championship contender list at the end of the season if they don't put together an extended stretch of dominant basketball. End of story. I'm not married to the Lakers. If they end the season 41-41, I will not pick them to win. I will not. I will give them no chance. There is no example in NBA history of a team bullshitting through the regular season and winning the title. It has never happened. The only time it even remotely happens is when there is a defending champion that goes into the next season and then bullshits, but they are the defending champion. This Lakers team is not the defending champion. They do not have that kind of margin for error. I do not give them that leeway. I am just leaving them on the contender list because I believe they will. I believe that after the deadline, after LeBron and AD accept the reality that Darvin Ham's not going anywhere, after a little bit of personnel turnover, I think they'll rip off a 18-game stretch or 20-game stretch where they win, 2/3 to 3/4 of their games. That's what I think is going to happen eventually. In the short term, though, especially as Darvin Ham is leaning into this unathletic lineup, which is Austin, D'Lo, Taurean Prince, especially in a game like last night where Jared Vanderbilt gets ejected, they are specifically going to struggle against really athletic teams that have size. Houston's one of those teams. They're big and strong on the perimeter. They have a lot of athleticism. And so they can expose the Lakers for their weaknesses, especially on nights when they don't bring great effort. And so, again, don't really expect any sort of consistent success from the Lakers until we get through this deadline a week from Thursday. From there, if they don't put it together, then they don't have a chance, to put it simply. They've got to show that you've got to show an extended stretch of you playing a championship level. 2 questions left. Wonder if Embiid's sitting is a strategic move by the team to not allow Denver to make any adjustments. So this is an interesting question, especially as it relates to what happened in the game in Philly, which was Joel Embiid down the stretch, ball denial on Nikola Jokic, which really heavily disrupted Denver's offense. Here's the thing, though. I'm a big believer that if you are the better team, the more you play, the more it will bear out. That's why 7-game series are a thing in the NBA. They want it so that there's not shooting variance determining the NBA champion. They want the best team to win, right? Over a large sample size, if you are better, you're going to win. So in terms of like showing off any sort of schematic whatever, to me, if you're scared of that, then you don't believe you're better. That's you problem. If you believe you're better, go beat Denver in Denver. If they bring an adjustment in game 1 of the playoff series because of something in that game, you would have to figure it out anyway. Like, if you're better than Denver, go beat Denver. If you believe you're better than Denver, you're not afraid about adjustments because you think you're going to have more adjustments at the end of the day. So I thought that was a good question and an interesting kind of way of looking at it. But in my opinion, it's not an excuse for them not playing in the game. Last question. You being so high on the Clippers is going to backfire. Trust. Okay. So the reason why I clipped this one out of the comments is when it comes to predictions, in my opinion, predicting that a team is not going to win the title is not really much of a prediction. 29 of the 30 teams don't win the title. You could have come out of 2020 and been like, man, Lakers, LeBron James, and Anthony Davis, nobody's beating these guys. I'm picking them in 2021. You would have been wrong. You could have been like, man, Giannis, top of the world. He's coming back next year. He's going to win it in 2022. You would have been wrong. You could have been like, man, the Warriors, Andrew Wiggins, Steph Curry, Jordan Poole on the rise. Jonathan Kuminga's coming. They're going to win in 2023. You would have been wrong. Denver is my championship favorite. I'm picking them to win the title this year. It is more likely than not that I am wrong. Because only one team gets to hoist the Larry O'Brien trophy. And so the reason why I say that is like, when I believe in a team's ability to win the title, doesn't mean I'm saying they're going to win the title. Every team out there has a small chance. I think Denver has the best chance, and it's probably only like a 20% chance. It's in the Vegas odds. They're like, I haven't looked in a couple weeks, but DraftKings had them at like +4 something last time I looked. Meaning if you bet $100 on the Nuggets to win the title, you'd win $400 something dollars. So like, nobody has a great chance. So like, if you get on online and you'd be like, the Clippers suck, I guarantee you they're going to lose. Yeah, you're probably right. But that doesn't mean they're not a championship contender. And in my opinion, when you attack the regular season the way they have, and when you've won as many games as they have, and you look as impressive as they have, it's a clear sign that they have a chance to win the title, and I think we'd be foolish to count the Clippers out. All right, guys, that is all I have for today. As always, I sincerely appreciate you supporting the show. Big day tomorrow. I'm going to react to a couple of games from tonight's slate, and then in the afternoon, I'm recording with Carter Rodriguez from the Chasetown Pod. Those of you guys who were hoping we would talk about Clippers, Cavs, that's why I didn't hit that game today, because we're going to be talking with Carter tomorrow. I appreciate you guys, and I will see you then.